The older I got, still in childhood, the less true I became to myself. So I feel like aged 4, I really knew myself. And life after that was a gradual erosion of that certainty. So much outside our front doors is chaotic and unpredictable and noisy. I really need a space where I feel that I can take off that cloak of the outside world and just be at peace in an environment. Failure is essentially what happens when your life doesn't go according to plan. So then you have to think about where you got the plan from and whether it was actually yours.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Matt.
If I ask you to picture the home that you grew up in
Yes.
or spent the most time in when you were young, what do you see?
Well, most of my vivid memories date from when I was 4. And it actually wasn't the home that I then did most of my growing up in. But the home that I remember so well is in Epsom. And I remember it being a massive house, but of course, it's just because I was very small. And I remember that house having a feeling of elegance about it. And I particularly loved the bay window. There was a window seat in the bay window where my mother taught me to read and write. And so we spent very many sort of happy half hours there. And I also remember this attic space where I would get up before anyone else because I'm the youngest, and I would go and spend hours just building Lego in the attic and feel so at peace and happy, and then go down for breakfast. And it was right next to the South Downs and where they ran the Derby each year. And I remember my parents having Derby Day parties. But that same year, when I turned 4, we moved to the north of Ireland. And we moved to a home constructed out of 2 former fishing cottages that had been knocked together, about 30 minutes from the city of Derry and near the village of Claudy, opposite a river. And that's where I spent the next 20 years of my life, really. So I've got more coherent memories of that space.
Okay, so let's talk about the one in Ireland then. What did that smell like, feel like, sound like?
Gosh, smell. It's so evocative and it's so difficult to describe because it smelt quite, but I don't mean this in a bad way, quite cold and damp.
Okay, yeah.
But you know that smell that you sometimes get in a forest? Like there's something quite sort of comforting and welcoming about it as well. It smelt like that. And it was partly because it was Ireland and it was cold and it rained 98% of the time, but also because my parents are of a generation where they refuse to put on the central heating
Yeah.
unless absolutely necessary, unless the cold water was freezing as it came out of the tap, more or less. So it obviously felt like home, but it was quite an eccentric house. It was a sort of ragtag bag of other people's tastes. And I remember there was a swathe of virulent red and gold carpet, which makes it sound incredibly grand, and it wasn't, but it was a carpet of a certain era, probably dated from the sort of 70s. And it carpeted the hallway and the stairs. And it always covered such a large surface area that it was too expensive for my parents to replace. So we lived with that carpet, and I never saw it anywhere else other than when I went to the cinema to see Casper the Friendly Ghost, that movie. And Casper lives in this sort of haunted mansion, and they had the same carpet.
No
The set
way.
designer had used the same carpet. But we were talking earlier about my love of history, and there was real history to that place. There was an attic which I found so triggering for flights of fancy and imagination. And I knew that I wanted to write from a very young age. And I would go to the attic and I made an old sort of tea chest into my desk. And I would write there and invent stories. And I could sort of see the architecture of how the 2 fishing cottages had been put together. So where the original staircase was, there was now a sort of deep bookshelf. And I loved all of that kind of storytelling that I could fathom from the bones of the house. And then we had this, what we called the Rath in our back garden, which was this mound that dated from Norman times. There was still sort of old castle stones on bits of it. And being able to run around there and like camp in my own garden and have adventures was incredibly exciting for me.
That sounds quite magical. So would you say it had a positive sort of emotional atmosphere about it?
That's a difficult question to answer because of the context of the time and the place. So we moved to the north of Ireland in 1982, and 30 minutes down the road in Derry, which was where I went to primary school, a war was raging. And I was very quickly and then consistently aware of tension, political tension, and historic tension, and stories that weren't being told, things that weren't talked about, and a sort of thrumming sense of danger.
Yeah.
um, and so there was always that. Like, I remember very early on that childlike fear of having monsters under your bed, but they weren't monsters for me. They were terrorists. They were balaclava terrorists. That's what I was scared of. And it was a real fear. Like, it was grounded in reality. But within all of that, um, because we lived in the countryside, it also felt removed. And I could quite happily go off on my bicycle on my own from a very young age and just spend hours in relative safety. So it was a combination of things, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It was a very highly charged time, wasn't it, that? I remember being in our sitting room at home and the windows shaking as a bomb went off in central London.
Yeah.
And, I can only imagine what that would have been like in Northern Ireland, but
Yes. Well, you've had a similar experience to me then, because when I went to secondary school in Belfast, and I remember a bomb going off and the windows shaking.
really.
And then the next day, walking to the bus station to get the bus home and walking past mangled pieces of metal that had been cars, and walking past the Europa Hotel, which bore the infamous distinction of being the most bombed hotel in Europe, and every single panel of glass being shattered. And those kind of memories, and shopping centres being evacuated because of a bomb scare, going past military checkpoints on our way to school, that was all part and parcel of our normality. And as a child, of course, you're not in control of your life. And so then to have this added element of there being a lack of control beyond that could feel quite unsafe.
Mhm.
And at the same time, my parents did an amazing job of shielding us from that in many ways, and ensuring that we did have those adventures still. And my father is a great outdoors person and was constantly sort of marching up the Mourne Mountains with us with sort of soggy chicken sandwiches as a picnic. And so I actually consider myself a countryside person. That's where I grew up, even though I've ended up feeling most at home in London.
Why did the family uproot and move to Ireland?
So my grandmother, whose painting hangs in our bedroom, which I just showed you, she was born in Belfast. So that side of the family, originally Ashkenazi Jews from Germany, and they had moved, my branch had moved to Northern Ireland in the late 19th century. So my grandmother was born there, but came to art college in London and then ended up living in Cambridgeshire. So there was a slight family connection. My dad, he's retired now, but he was a doctor, and he applied for jobs all over the UK. And he got a promotion effectively to be a general surgeon. And it just so happened that it was in Atnagelvin Hospital in Derry. And we moved out. And I think my father, part of what makes him so unique and special is that he has a great capacity for imagination. And I think he imagined a sort of idyllic rural life, some of which was available to us. That's why one of the first things we did was go and buy a donkey and a cart. And there is a picture of me and my older sister, Catherine, in the back of this car just after we'd bought it. And with my father in front wearing a sort of deerstalker hat. My sister and I are in 80s anoraks, but it does look like something from Victorian times, that photo
Oh,
now.
wow.
So it was this curious mix of uh, the desire to pursue a rural idyll in beautiful countryside, and then the awareness that there was this political danger.
So are you the younger of two girls then?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me about the family dynamic as a whole. What was that like at home?
My sister was incredibly protective of me, and an amazing older sister who had demanded from my parents that she wanted a younger sister, and then I appeared. Um, and my parents, my father worked a lot and was constantly on call and had a lot of very confronting experiences as a surgeon in Ireland at that time. He dealt with a lot of kneecappings and post-bomb injuries, to such an extent that he became something of an expert in war surgery, and later on joined Médecins Sans Frontières and went to places like Sierra Leone and the Balkans, and then subsequently joined the RAF as a surgeon. So he went that way about it. A lot of people assumed we were a military family
Okay.
at that time in Ireland because of our accents, but we weren't. And my mother was an amazing mother in so many ways, and had given up her work to raise me and my sister. And then the older we got, the more she started doing bits and pieces here and there. So she taught French for a while at my primary school. And then she later became a university lecturer at the University of Ulster and a local magistrate. And then worked on the board at McGilligan Prison to improve life for prisoners. So both my parents have like a strong moral compass, and they also are voracious readers. And so I grew up in a house surrounded by books and people who thought it was important to read them. And that's one of my big privileges in life. And they never made me feel stupid or silly for wanting to write myself.
Hmm.
They took me seriously. And I think that's one of the most generous things you can do with a child.
Yeah.
So I felt very safe in that, in being able to explore something that I loved. I was very supported in that respect.
So you used the word privileges there. When you moved to Northern Ireland, did you also move into an unfamiliar place in terms of just the dynamics of it? And so did you feel like a bit of an outsider? I mean, what was that like for you?
Yes, hugely. But I didn't realize that's how I felt until a bit later on, because I was still only 4 when we moved. But we did move away from everything that I knew at the time, which was Epsom and my lovely grandparents who lived in Putney, and seeing them a lot. And then we didn't anymore, really, very much. And, it was still the early 80s. So there was no internet, there weren't mobile phones. So communication though was slightly more difficult. Um, but I didn't question it, because you don't at that age. And it was only really when I went to secondary school in Belfast that I understood the depth of my difference. I actually had a lovely primary school experience. It was a very small school. There were 6 people in my year, great teachers, and it was an amazing grounding for life. But Belfast was tougher, and it was a tougher school and a tougher dynamic. And I was made aware of what a freak I was for speaking like this. I was also a year ahead of myself academically, which doesn't go down that well at that age. And because I'd grown up in the countryside with a vanishingly little sense of what was cool, I was a total nerd, and people didn't know how to categorize me. And that was much more difficult. And to cut a long story short, I didn't have a particularly good time at that school, even though it's a great school and lots of people I know and like went there. I ended up getting a scholarship to a boarding school in England when I was 13. And that school in Malvern in Worcestershire was the saving of me in many ways. But when I started there, I felt like an outsider in a different way, because although I spoke in the right way and was kind of immediately accepted for that reason, I hadn't grown up in that environment, and I didn't know any of the unspoken rules of sort of social etiquette. So there was a lot of code switching in my childhood which now I'm really grateful for, because I think it's made me into an observer and made me into a writer and made me someone who I think I have an ability to connect with people, and it probably dates from that.
That's really interesting. Would you use the word outsider uh, uh, as a youngster, or is that too strong a
No,
word? No.
that's such a good question. I would never have used that word. And actually, I still feel reticent using it now, in the sense that I am extremely privileged and I am white and upper middle class and live in this lovely house and make my living from tapping away at a laptop, which is not a privilege afforded to so much of the global population. But it is an experience that I find fascinating and inspiring in many ways, and it's really informed my writing.
Mm.
It's only when I've written novels and other people read them that I understand what I've written about thematically. And one of the themes that comes up again and again is people who don't fit in some way, and unreliable narrators of their own lives and their own selves. And someone who's had that experience of outsidership, I find so interesting and compelling.
You've obviously got a wildly successful podcast about failure. What was your failure as a child, would you say?
So the older I got, still in childhood, the less true I became to myself.
Mm.
So I feel like aged 4, I really knew myself. And that's a beautiful thing. And I don't know if lots of people feel it, but I definitely did feel it. And I felt kind of at peace with who I was. And life after that was a gradual erosion of that certainty, for good and for bad. But I think a large part of that came from um, not feeling accepted by the people that I was in friendship groups with, or the sort of broader environment. And so then I tried to shapeshift in order to fit in. So I think that's my failure. And my life in more recent years has been a dismantling of that and a recovery of who I was at 4.
Okay.
And that's been a really healing and great process.
Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? Trying to get back to the very essence of yourself somehow.
Definitely. And I
Yeah.
think home is an incredibly precious space in order to facilitate that happening. Like that can't happen unless you feel safe where you live. And I feel safe not only where I live physically, but where I live personally in terms of my romantic relationship now. I understand that love actually starts with safety, which I'd never really understood before. And so then when you feel safe with your key relationships, you can start to be brave enough to look at the truth of who you are. And it turns out that actually I like the truth of who I am.
Yeah.
And that all this bit in the middle where I was trying to be something slightly different was never fulfilling. It didn't feel, I was never settled. I think that's the thing. I never felt that I was living in alignment with myself.
You've said, haven't you, that you're an introvert that's learned how to be an extrovert.
Yeah.
Is that fair? So talk to me about that. How did that manifest itself when you were young then, that introversion?
Yes, I'm sort of annoyed now because so many people claim to be introverts. I feel like, but yes, I do. I do genuinely feel that. And as a child, I would spend hours reading books or inventing stories or coming up with games that I would like make out of cereal boxes, and I just had a very rich inner life. And that's probably also a function of having been born in 1978 and growing up in the 80s, where there weren't so many available sources of entertainment for children. And you had to make your own fun, and boredom in a way is like a great diving board for creativity. And again, that countryside, I would make myself dens in overgrown rhododendron bushes, all of that sort of stuff. So it manifested like that. And I think I don't know how chatty I was. I don't know. I'd have to ask my
The
parents.
irony.
Yeah, I know the irony. That's what I mean about having learned to. But I liked observing, and I always remember my beloved grandparents who were just amazing. They were amazing grandparents, and they were my mother's parents. And I remember my grandmother, I had seen that she needed something, like she needed a cut pasta or something. And she actually said to my mother about me, she's so great at anticipating someone's needs. And it really meant a lot to me for some reason. But just, I think it meant a lot to me because I like being able to understand what someone might want or need without them having to say it. And that for me is part of the art of connection. So I suppose I was quite a sort of watchful child, but I loved stories and escaping into stories.
Mm.
And at that time, it wasn't a particularly friendly climate for introverts. And because I love writing, like I always wanted to write books, but I thought, oh, I probably need to learn how to write first. So I'll become a journalist first. So I found myself with a first job in journalism post university on the Londoner's Diary on the Evening Standard, which was such a baptism of fire for a slightly socially awkward still introvert, because I was sent to glamorous parties every night of the week and I had to come up with a tidbit of gossip and roll up to celebrities and ask them questions. And it was a great learning curve for me because I had to pretend to be confident, and I still have that ability to project confidence even if I don't feel it.
Well, let's talk about that then, because
Yeah.
the way that you got the job at the Evening Standard, I thought was quite funny. Tell us about that.
So I was at university and my friend wanted to go to a recruitment evening. And it was a recruitment evening for sort of publishing and the arts. And I sort of went reluctantly along with her. And there was a guy on his own at a stall at the very entrance of this room. And he was from the Evening Standard. And I was like, oh, I want to be a journalist. So we got chatting. And he was actually the deputy editor of the Londoner's Diary. He was like, well, why don't you come in for a week's work experience? I went in for a week's work experience, and it was the sort of tail end of the glory days of Fleet Street. You could still smoke in the office.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the then editor of the Evening Standard, Max Hastings, used to leave on like Friday afternoons to go for shooting weekends in the country. It's hilarious. And I brought in a story that turned out to be a front page scoop. And it was about female members of the military getting boob jobs funded by the taxpayer on the Ministry of Defence. And it stood up, and it was a really good story. And Max Hastings summoned me into his office and said, well, listen, we'd like to offer you a job, and come back after you've graduated and we'll train you up over the course of a year, and we'll move you from the Londoner's Diary to the news department, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was lucky that I graduated with a job to go to. And I started on the Londoner's Diary thinking, oh, in 3 months I'll be rotated and go somewhere else. Max Hastings then left as editor and was replaced by someone who didn't ever move me. So I stayed on the Londoner's Diary for a year, and that's how I got that job.
Love it. And you worked at the Observer as well, didn't you, in other places? I mean, what would you have said that success would have looked like to you at that point?
At that point, I was still very unimaginative in terms of how I thought of success. So it would have been winning a British Press Award, having my name on the front page meant a lot to me. There is something really thrilling about that.
Yeah.
And that's what it would have meant. It would have meant becoming someone like Lynn Barber, one of my journalistic heroes, an incredible interviewer on The Observer who worked there when I did. And personally, I thought success was getting married by a certain age, having children, and living an extremely conventional heteronormative life. And now, of course, I don't think any of that. But at the time, I was definitely, that's what I felt.
Okay.
I actually, sorry, just to finesse that slightly, I think the respect of others was a big part of my success. So, which is a good thing, but it also can sometimes veer perilously close to people pleasing and seeking validation and approval from people you've never met who you can't possibly control their opinion. So I think there was that element of it as well.
Am I right in saying that you first had some therapy in your 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say was happening there then?
I love the depth of your research. Thank you.
Sorry.
No. I feel so known. It's such an act of kindness. So I was 27
Okay.
when I first went into therapy, which I think is a key age for many of us, Saturn returns and all that. And I had a job, it was before The Observer. I had a job at another national Sunday newspaper, the Sunday Telegraph. And it was just a very destabilizing time for newspapers. And various new editors had come in and changed everything. And it was just quite stressful because I felt that I continually had to build up my reputation again with each new editor. And I was in a long-term romantic relationship, but I think I felt worried that I was falling behind in some way. And I remember crying every morning before I went to work. And then I thought, this can't be right. And a friend of mine had just started seeing a therapist. And so I asked her what it was like. She's like, it's great. Here's the number. And I did 12 weeks of CBT with a terrific therapist. And then I was like, great, I'm cured. I'm really enlightened and I can go on with the rest of my life
That's that done.
and make all the right decisions. Exactly. Um, Spoiler alert, it didn't quite turn out like that, but it did introduce me to the value of therapy and to be able to talk to someone who is objective, who isn't a friend or a loved one, who you don't feel like you're wasting their time or you're being self-indulgent by talking things through with them and sense checking where your head's at.
Yeah.
It's been a great resource in my life, therapy.
Yeah. Well, let's move on then to your term, not mine, failures of adulthood,
Yes.
of which you've been very candid about. I mean, starting with I think is your divorce, maybe your
Definitely.
first marriage, something you've spoken about a lot. Tell us about that.
So having done these 12 weeks of therapy, obviously, equipped for everything,
Yeah.
I thought I knew myself. And it was a shock to discover that I didn't. And that the commitment I had made to my ex-husband, which I fully meant at the time, although if I'm truly honest, was there like a tiny patch of instinct that said, should it be this difficult? Maybe there was. But I went into that marriage fully believing, as I think most people do, this is going to last and this is it. And it wasn't. And so that's why it felt like a failure. It felt like a failure of self-awareness. And as someone who values truth very highly, it felt also as though I'd been lying in some way or fraudulent in some way because I hadn't actually excavated who I was. And so I turned up a sort of imposter in my own life, which I didn't realize at the time, but now I have realized it. And that relationship was dysfunctional for various reasons that I won't go into because it's not just my story to tell, it's also my ex's. So I can only speak about it from my perspective, but it felt like a failure as well because there was so much shame attached to it. I felt really embarrassed by myself, by the decision that I'd made, by what I'd asked of all of my loved ones to come to this wedding, to kind of give us presents and to believe in this relationship. And then to have to say, actually, I don't think I can do it.
So how soon did you get divorced after marrying?
3 years.
3 years.
We'd been together for 4 up to that point. The thing that brought it to a head was my second failure, which was my attempt to have children. And that didn't happen and hasn't happened. But it was the first experience I had of fertility treatment and of miscarriage. And I felt very, very alone through that. And ideally, you shouldn't feel alone if you're in a partnership at that point. And it sort of made me understand things and see things clearly. And I just kind of hit a wall at some point and knew my instinct took over. That 4-year-old self took over and was like, oh no, you can't do this. And it's absolutely one of the hardest things I've ever done or gone through. And I left. And talking of home, I left that home. And luckily, looking back, we were renting. We'd only ever rented. But it was still home, and I'd still gone to an enormous amount of effort to make it feel nice and look nice, and I left basically everything. Anything that was jointly owned, I left behind, um, because I just needed to go. And it was a it was a great learning in terms of the value of stuff and how I was able to do that. As someone who had always thought that trinkets and physical memories were incredibly important and possessions, I now realize they're not at all. And it's made me see that a lot more clearly. And for a year, I didn't have my own home. I stayed with generous friends, with my mother. I lived in LA in an Airbnb for 3 months. And there was a freedom to that, as well as everything else that was happening, which was incredibly stressful. There was such freedom to it. And it was kind of amazing being in other people's spaces and seeing what that shifted internally and what new ideas I came up with in those spaces. So I'm grateful for that part of it, but it was very hard.
So you described sort of leaving all of your possessions behind. Was it quite a sudden separation? Is that why? Why didn't you take the stuff with you?
Oh, saved by the bell, literally.
Hang on, you got a comedy doorbell.
let me just get those.
That's properly snowing now. Look at that.
No, it is. It was like, I think all relationship breakups end up feeling very sudden, even though they're not, because they'll always shock at least one party. And ultimately, I think I realized that the relationship itself had been in kind of slow motion destruction for many months. So in that respect, it wasn't sudden. But the decision to go had to be made quite suddenly in a weird sort of way. I was like, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it. And so I had to kind of paint myself into a corner of doing it. And then I felt such an enormous sense of guilt at having been the one to do it, that I think I was like, well, I don't deserve any of this. This is and there was part of me that wanted a freshness, that wanted a fresh start and wanted a reinvention. So I think for those reasons, that's why I kind of left things to make it easier.
But you're obviously a high achiever, right? You're a Cambridge University graduate. You know, everything you've done in your work life suggests that as well. So I'm just really interested that you've hit upon this theme of failure
Yeah.
as a strand through your life, because would it be fair to say that because of who you are as an individual, these things have been harder than they otherwise might have been?
Oh, that was such a good question. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with it, which was like, would it be fair to say that you as an individual don't really understand failure, which is something that I have had leveled at me?
Absolutely not. No,
Yeah.
I think failure is something that we feel within ourselves, right? That's a
Yes.
totally individual
Exactly that.
judgment. But
Exactly
no,
that.
I'm interested.
Mm.
Someone who isn't used to getting things wrong. Let's put it like that.
Yes. Well, I think this will be familiar to many of your listeners and viewers, particularly if you're a woman of a certain age, in that I feel there was great pressure on us as young girls and women to be perfect and to get everything right and to be pleasant and kind and thoughtful and be wonderful domestic goddesses at the same time as ensuring that the fights our mothers' generations and grandmothers' generations had fought for us, ensuring that we had thriving careers and were able to do it all because we were so lucky to be born into this era. And we were and we are. But there was an immense degree of pressure that and I know a lot of my contemporaries felt to get everything right, whether it was kind of romantic relationship or professional achievement. And if you layer on that someone who was fortunate enough to be good at exams and good academically and got a lot of praise for that, and probably, I'm talking about myself here, but probably also conflated that praise with a sense of love or approval or safety, then that adds into the mix. Like, you start to feel unsafe if you get something wrong, or you fail an exam, or you fail at a marriage. And all of that made me into a people pleaser of sort of nauseatingly extreme proportions. And that goes back to the idea of truth, because I wasn't being truthful about myself. I was trying to shapeshift to be whoever someone else wanted me to be, particularly in romantic relationships. I was like, the worst thing that could happen is that this person will leave me, because then I'll feel abandoned and scared and unsafe. So I must ensure that I am sufficiently perfect that they never do.
Mm.
And all of that goes into feeling like a failure when you get divorced. But I think the other thing is that, what is failure? Failure is essentially what happens when your life doesn't go according to plan. So then you have to think about where you got the plan from, and whether it was actually yours, or whether it was inherited from your family history, or from social conditioning, or from the fact that you watched too many rom-coms in the 80s. Very often it's not what you really want deep down, if you're being super truthful with yourself. And so I think that affects us all in varying degrees. And some of us, myself included, have privileges that act as safety nets, that when life doesn't go according to plan, we can pull on a different lever. And other people don't, and failure is much more crushing. And then you get yet more people who are constantly allowed to fail upwards and end up as prime ministers of the country.
Yeah, right.
And failure is such a rich and thrilling topic. And when I launched How to Fail, I had no idea how much it would teach me, and how much it would radically redefine how I thought of failure. But it's important to say that at the time I launched it, which was July 2018, I really did feel like I'd failed in meaningful and difficult ways. I'd had the divorce. I failed to have the baby that I thought I longed for. A relationship that I got into after my divorce had also failed. And I was staring down the barrel of my 40s, feeling like I'd got nothing in place that I thought I wanted. And yet I was also writing pieces for a Sunday newspaper, and seemed, if you looked at my professional CV, I seemed professionally successful. And so there was a sort of disconnect there too, between what I was projecting and how I actually felt. And I think that feels like failure too.
Yeah. Are you happy to talk about the fertility
Yes,
treatment?
definitely.
And you say definitely, why? Because you think it's helpful for others.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it gives what I went through meaning to me.
Yeah.
It gives it a kind of purpose. That's how I'm able to be at peace with it, is talking about it, sharing it, advocating for people who have also experienced it. It's been a great healing gift. So that's why I'm really happy to talk about it.
Okay. I have a very small personal experience of this myself, in that my wife Faye and I went through 2 rounds of IVF, and as a result, we have beautiful identical twin girls,
Wow.
which was an amazing outcome for us. But I know for many others, you don't get that outcome, and it's a very harrowing process to go through anyway. Are you able just to sort of, cast a bit of a light on some of the things you've
Mm.
been through, and how difficult it's been? Because, yeah, I can't imagine really.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so happy that you got your twin girls. And I'm also glad that I get to talk with someone who knows.
Yeah.
I also did 2 rounds of IVF, and that was enough for me.
Yeah.
And so my fertility journey lasted 12 years on and off. And when I first started, I was in my first marriage. It was 2014, and I was given the very unhelpful diagnosis of unexplained infertility. And that's when they said I should do IVF. And I did 2 back to back, and it was really difficult. And at that stage, hardly anyone spoke about. I don't know what your experience was, Matt, but I went to a bookshop and tried to find a book that would tell me what to expect through IVF, and there was nothing. There was just
That's
kind of
true.
mother and
Yeah.
baby books. That was it. I thought it would be pills.
Yeah.
That's how naive I was. And then the reality of it, as you will know, is daily injections, hormonal surges, um, invasive procedures. It's like having another job. And my experience as a woman going through that was I was consistently told that I was failing in some way. I was failing to respond to the drugs. My friend was told that she had an inhospitable womb. You're told that you have an incompetent cervix. Like, all of this language is the vocabulary of failure. There were embryos at the end that got transferred, but they didn't stick. And then at the end of that same year, I got pregnant naturally. And then I had what's called a missed miscarriage, which is where you see a heartbeat. We saw a heartbeat at 8 weeks. And I miscarried at 12 weeks. And that was, I now realize, really traumatic. But I didn't realize that at the time. I was so numb to it all, partly because my marriage was about to end, but also because I'd had this year of being stuffed full of hormones. I'd sort of technically, by the end of that year, been pregnant 3 times. And then I got divorced and thought, okay, well, I've still got some time. It's my mid-30s. So I froze my eggs. And then I got into a new relationship with a younger man for 2 years who wasn't ready for commitment to that level. And so when that relationship ended, I really did feel, okay, now I need to face the fact that this is going to be a different future from what I imagined. And then I met wonderful Justin on Hinge. And he already has 3 children. And when we met, I thought I was at peace with not having a baby. But we got pregnant naturally just after I turned 41. And it seemed like such a miracle. And that very sadly ended in miscarriage. And then it made us realize how much we did actually want it. So we started pursuing fertility treatment, which involved various different clinics. And then I had another miscarriage during lockdown, which was the worst because obviously the medical category of it meant that it wasn't by any means an emergency. And it was another one where we'd seen the heartbeat and then went back and the heartbeat had disappeared. And I was given pills to take here, actually, back here. And that was an extraordinarily painful experience physically and emotionally. And then we decided to stop for a bit because we just needed to recover. And it was still locked down. And so fertility treatment was incredibly difficult to pursue. And we got engaged and we got married in that time. And then after that, we thought, okay, final fling of the dice, let's try egg donation. And we did that with a highly recommended clinic in LA. And it was, I cannot tell you, Matt, what a stressful process it was. This is a whole other podcast, the fertility industrial complex, particularly in America.
Mm.
It took us a year to find a donor. This wonderful, generous woman. That cycle went forward. We were lucky enough that we could pay for it, but that was a stretch. And we got to the stage where after all of these years, it finally felt like everything was aligned. I did everything by the book, did the acupuncture, changed my diet, took all the supplements, and then that didn't work. And that was one of the darkest points of my life. And actually, interestingly, given the topic of this podcast, it coincided with not being at home because I was in LA in such a depressing Airbnb in Venice. And it was torrential rain. It was so miserable. And there was something so devastating about not being able to be in my safe space, in my home. It made it even worse. But during the process of that darkness and through many conversations with Justin, I decided to focus on the love that I did have in my life, which was Justin, my amazing friends, my family, rather than the love that I lacked. And I decided to let go of the idea of having biological children. And I feel tremendously lucky that I have a community now of other people who have gone through or are going through fertility treatment. And I don't feel alone in it anymore. And that's something that talking about it gives me back.
Mm. I think it's amazing that you're so open about it. And I think it is genuinely helpful for other people.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, it sounds incredibly traumatic. Um, how do you reflect on it now then? I mean, you sound relatively sanguine about it. That might
Yeah.
not be the right word, but do you think that you will ever fully come to terms with it?
Yes. I think I have come to terms with it. it doesn't mean that I'm not sad about it.
Mm.
And I think understanding that those two things can coexist, the peace and the sadness, has been very helpful for me.
Mm.
And it's meant that I don't try and tamp down the sadness anymore. I don't try and live in denial of it. And just being aware of when it happens and when it surges and acknowledging it is the healing.
Mm.
So there's this example I can give you, and it will sound quite trivial if you've never been through similar. But last weekend, Justin wanted to go to this Jurassic World experience at Battersea Power Station down the road from us, which is lots of animatronic dinosaurs. And I think he thought it was going to be better than it actually was, because it literally was just like big dinosaur puppets. And we were the only adults there without children. We were surrounded by excited young children, and I felt really flat during that and afterwards.
Okay.
And then I felt annoyed with myself. I was like, why am I feeling so flat? Why am I so moody? Why am I? And then I realized that's what it was. That's an experience that I have had so many times before, being around people with children, partners with children, and not feeling part of it. And now acknowledging that I'll never have that, I try not to put myself in those situations when I don't have to. That's not to say that I don't love being around my friends' children. I really do. And actually that's become a lot easier since letting go of this dream. But it's just like things like that are oddly triggering.
Yeah,
um,
I get that.
but just being aware of it and actually just saying it out loud to you
Yeah.
is really helpful, and it means that I can release it.
Mm. I want to talk to you about this home, but just before we do, one of the other things we talked about on the tour earlier was this word connection.
Mm.
So you have a tattoo on your wrist, and that word connection is clearly very important to you. And that really is what a podcast conversation
Yes.
kind of is. Just talk to me about that. Why is that in your individual life? Why is that important?
I think it's the sense of being seen and understood, because I had long periods of my life where I didn't feel seen or understood. And that can be incredibly isolating when you can't communicate the truth of yourself to others, but also to yourself. That it feels so alienating. And alienation, I think, is where all of the darkness lies. And understanding that about myself means that I want to be able to do it for other people. I want to make other people feel seen and heard and understood in any moment that I have with them, because that's what humanity is. That's what it's about. So that's the deep answer.
Mm.
And the way that I do that is through podcasting, but also through writing, um, and also through sort of daily micro acts of connection, whether it's like looking someone in the eye when they're making you a cup of tea and saying thank you and asking how their day was. I think that genuinely has the power to change the world, because ultimately what you're doing there, it's like every single moment is an act of empathy. And that's so important to lean into. But the podcasting aspect has been revelatory for me. And I never thought it was something that I would do, partly because podcasts didn't exist when I was growing up. Um, but I think what's so precious about it, the way that I podcast and you podcast, is that one-on-one interaction, which for an introvert, like that's how I love social communication to be, is that I can hopefully get deep with someone and understand a little bit about who they are
Yeah.
in those moments.
Yeah.
That's why it's just such an amazing form, really.
Yeah. So if I think about my own experience, one of the reasons that I enjoy connecting with an individual in this way, like we're doing now, is I think because there was a trauma in my family before I was born that had ripples certainly through the next generation, and I think meant that actually as a family we didn't communicate with each other very much. And I had a brother and quite a macho father, and it wasn't really that kind of environment, which it was also, the late 70s, early
Yeah.
80s, and that's slightly the way things were. And I don't regret that at all. It is, it was what it was. But I think it's made me have a thirst for conversations that go beneath the surface level.
Yeah.
And so I try to have friendships that exist on that level, and I try to do that professionally as well. So that's kind of my justification for sitting here doing this kind of thing. But from your standpoint, why is it important to you to probe beneath that surface layer in that way?
That's so beautifully put, Matt. And I'm so sorry for the family trauma and the long tendrils of that. I think my answer is quite similar in a way, in that the experience of Northern Ireland, of understanding that the stories we don't tell, we're too scared to tell, the voices that we don't hear from, that we don't raise, they shape who we are as much, if not more, than the things that we do say.
Yeah.
So I'm very intrigued by absences. And also, if someone doesn't speak their truth, then other people are going to speak it for them. And so there's something about authenticity that's very important, and addressing the things that we'd rather live in denial of. Because if we continue to live in denial, we're not being shaped by ourselves, we're being shaped by other forces. And so I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's about realness.
Yeah.
And understanding. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Let's move on to this home, I think, because I was going to run out of time, but there's so many things to talk to you about. I kind of sit here all day. And
Ditto.
I think, I suppose one thing to come out of this, I think, being here today, is that you are someone that really clearly likes things to have a place.
Yes.
And you talked about the way you sort of set the house and set things on the shelves. So I guess the first question is around that. How does your home help you make sense of the world somehow? How does it give you that sense of control?
Wow.
Because I think that it is about control, isn't it, a little bit?
Is it about control? I mean, I always try and remind myself that control is an illusion. I think for me, it's about serenity. It's about feeling at peace when I walk through the door, and feeling a sense of shelter. And for me, that is helped by the idea that things are going to be in the place that I left them, but also the way that I've placed them in order to be pleasing to the eye and my sense of self. That's where it comes from. And I suppose there is an element of control to that as well.
For sure.
Definitely. But it's so much outside our front doors is chaotic and unpredictable and noisy. And I really need a space where I feel that I can take off that cloak of the outside world and just be at peace in an environment.
Yeah.
And I can feel that in lots of different places. It doesn't always have to be my home. My home is my favorite place. But, I have spent a lot of time traveling and being in Airbnbs, and generally I get a sense of somewhere quite quickly. I'm quite good. My mother will say that it's one of my skills. I can always identify a nice place, like an Airbnb or a hotel or a place that I think someone should move into online. Like I get, especially with the Modern House or Inigo, like I get a sense from photos. I'm quite good at that sort of stuff. And I can I think I'm good at making spaces where it feels nice to inhabit.
Yeah.
And so the reason this particular space helps me make sense of the world is because I can free up my mind and my headspace to imagine and to create and to tell stories, because my mind isn't being occupied by, God, I need to move that pile of newspapers and I should throw that out. And also, what about this? And it's so noisy and loud. And that's how it helps me.
If you are enjoying this conversation with Elizabeth and want to go deeper, you can watch our house tour on Patreon. On a snowy day in London, she gave me a full tour of life behind the scenes at her amazing Victorian house, including the study where she writes and her remarkably serene bedroom. head over to patreon.com/homingwithmatt to take a look. I see. So it's reducing the to-do list in some ways, so you can concentrate on the task at hand.
I think so. I've never actually thought about it this deeply before, but I think so. A bit like, Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs always had their uniform, black polo. I don't do that with clothes. But that actually, I wish I could. I wish I could be someone.
Yeah.
I bet your wife's an amazing dresser.
She is an amazing dresser. But she has her own brand and she makes clothes, and actually it's great for me in that I get to wear the clothes that she designs and makes. So actually when you have that uniform, it does it's reducing the cognitive load, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's what it's about.
Exactly. I haven't done that with clothes yet, but I aspire to.
Yeah. So you've used the word safety a few times in this conversation. How does safety play into the role that the home plays, do you think?
Gosh, it's huge. I've lived in environments where it's felt incredibly tense and like you have to tread on eggshells because you can't disrupt the balance for fear of someone's anger or retribution. Like, I've lived in those spaces and it's awful and really sort of shatters your sense of yourself, because if you can't be yourself in your own home, where can you be? Like, where do you find your escape and your refuge? And that can be a dangerous spiral for a lot of people. So it's really, really paramount for me. And it's a safety that comes from the relationships that exist within the home, who we invite in. Like, I'm actually very, very selective about whether anything is ever filmed at home, or where, like, I know you're very lucky. No,
that's very kind of you to invite us in then.
I'm deeply honored and I love the work that you do, but I don't tend to do that because I actually like it to be private. I've discovered that even though I'm an inveterate oversharer, that there are some things that I like to be private about. Like, gosh, what is this maturity?
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
So are there environments in the outside world that you feel unsafe in?
I think any woman probably would say yes. And maybe it's not just a gender thing.
And I absolutely understand that statement. And I think, maybe more on a psychological level, maybe like,
yes.
Let's think about the nervous system.
Yes. I don't like crowds.
Yeah.
And again, the introversion. Like, I don't get music festivals.
Yeah.
I find that scary. I hate it. I hate being in a crowd where there's no control in it. That feels quite sort of dangerous.
Yeah. No exit.
Yeah. I don't get Glastonbury. I don't get why people.
Yeah.
I just don't get it.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to think of, miserable broken parts of cities. I don't think anyone likes that. But I love cities. I love cities, actually.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of happy times in LA. And I know that place is not for everyone, but it is for me. I feel a sort of spiritual kinship with LA. And part of what I liked about it is that I went there post-divorce for the first time properly. And it was a time when I often felt quite alone. And I was like, where is my life going? Am I going to be single forever, etc.? But because it was LA, there was always something to do or something to see, or you could very easily go and be around people. And that's partly why I like writing in cafes, I think, for that reason. So I like cities. I like being able to have your own space in a city that you can venture out of and be around people. Having said that, I love cities. I've always struggled with New York. I find the energy chaotic and dark.
Oh, do you?
I feel like it's a panic attack in a city. And I've never understood it. But the last couple of times I've been there for work with a purpose, and it's been better. So maybe that's the thing. It's just that everyone else seems so busy and focused. And so you need to go there with an intention.
I love that comment, a panic attack in a city.
Yeah.
I think to put some color on that, if you think about it, it's a network it's grids, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually, evolution suggests that we're attracted to landscapes that have a bit more visual intrigue than that. You can't quite see round the hill, or that there's a river winding through a valley.
Yes, that's such a good point.
So it's kind of the definition of breakdown, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
and luckily they have Central Park, which is like a huge lung
Yes.
where everyone in New York can go and just sort of recuperate somehow.
Yes, and all of those vast buildings that
Yeah.
almost blot out the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you're so
I
right.
do love it. I mean, it's amazing energy-wise. I absolutely love New York, I must say. But I wanted to pivot to this idea that within our homes, we all have sort of regular routines and rhythms and
Mm.
rituals that we go through that somehow help us navigate our day. What do yours look like?
Oh, I'm a huge routine person. So I love sleep.
Yeah.
So I'll sleep as late as I feasibly can, given the demands of the workday, which is generally about 7:30. And then I wish I could say that I'm someone who meditates every morning, but I don't. I tend to exercise, ideally when I wake up so that it's out of the way, and also because I've understood like how important it is for me. As someone who spends so much time in her head, it's so crucial to be in my body for those moments. So that will either be, so we had a Peloton, or I'll go for a PT session or go to the gym or yoga. So those are my things.
Is that every day?
Most days, yeah, not all three of them.
Yeah,
One of
sure,
the
sure,
three,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then having said that I'm big into routine, actually, there's no such thing as a regular day. But if it's a Monday, then I go into the podcast studio, which is in Holborn, and I'll do sort of back to back recordings. And then on other days, generally, I'll have meetings or I'll try and carve out some quiet space to write. And I like to go and write. Having said that, I love my home and it's a safe space. I actually like to go and write other places, in cafes or in transit, often on trains, things like that. And then in the evenings, I have a rule that I don't go out on Mondays or Wednesdays. And that's a post pandemic rule because whilst the pandemic was very challenging, and deeply tragic for many people, one of the things that I did realize was that I liked being at home and I didn't have enough of that quality time.
Okay.
And so Mondays and Wednesdays, I don't go out. And then the other nights, I'll probably have a friend catch up or dinner out, or a work event. And then it all starts again. So yeah, actually, I don't have a routine at all. We've established.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, I read. I suppose I read in Bath at night and before I go to bed.
Yeah.
And I've started writing a diary. I've been writing a diary for a year.
Oh, have you? Why is that then?
Actually, talking of New York, one of the last trips I was there, Justin was with me. We went to MoMA, and I love a museum gift shop. And there was just this very appealing, tactile, little rectangular book, and it had one line a day written on the cover. And that's the premise: is that you don't have to write a whole thing, just one line a day, the most memorable thing that's happened to you that day. And it's a sort of 5-year diary, so you can compare each year. And I thought I'd start doing it. The idea of writing a full-on diary has felt quite overwhelming because I write so much in my daily life. But one line a day, I kind of liked it. And I found that the rhythm and the routine of that is quite meditative because you contemplate the day that you've just had and what you're grateful for. And that's a really nice way to end your day.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And are you still doing the therapy or not anymore?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
that's the other
That's okay.
major thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I go to therapy every other week.
Okay.
Well, actually, it's over Zoom, so I don't go anywhere. But she's wonderful. She's a Brazilian woman in her 70s, and she's helped me so much. And I see it as an investment in my mental health, but also as necessary because a lot of what you and I do, we're talking to people about things that are pretty profound, and sometimes they can be revealing and sad and traumatic, and I want to be able to be deeply present for those conversations and to go and deal with my own stuff somewhere else. Um, and in a way, I see it as a kind of modern day confessional. It's like you're sorting through the feelings that you have and the thoughts, and I find it tremendously helpful.
Hmm. Would you describe yourself as sensitive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very.
Very. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I spoke to Nigel Slater on the podcast
Mm.
about this phenomenon of the highly sensitive person. Have you come across that?
Yes.
It's a psychologist called Elaine Aron, and the basic idea of it is that about 15 to 20% of the population just have slightly heightened nervous systems, and they go through life experiencing things just turned up a little bit more than maybe some other people do. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, because if you think about a proportion of a population looking out for danger, or I don't know, looking out for food sources and so on, you need those sensitive people. So how does that sensitivity show up for you? And I suppose what happens when it becomes overly dominant? Like what does sort of Elizabeth going bad look like?
Yeah, okay. I love that phrase. First of all, I adore Nigel Slater.
Yeah, don't we all?
I mean, I know that everyone thinks this, but I just feel like I have a unique and special relationship with him. He's just amazing.
Yeah.
And I love that he's been on this show of yours, and because his house is so phenomenal and it's like the ultimate aspiration. He's just such a kind, cat-like man. That's what I love about him. So I think, I think I'm very sensitive to moods, opinions, changes in atmosphere, feelings, other people's moods I'm hypersensitive to. And that's been difficult in the past. And so there's an element where I've conditioned myself out of it. Like it's not, I can choose not to be. I actually sat next to Elizabeth Gilbert once at dinner, and she said something similar. She said, because so many people, a bit like Nigel Slater, feel that they have a unique relationship with Elizabeth Gilbert, and she's so transformative and such a wonderful human in so many ways. And when they come up to her at book signings or events, a lot of them will want to dump all of their stuff on her. And so she's developed this kind of mental cloak where she's present, but she puts a sort of energetic cloak around her. She's like, I don't need to take that on. And she reminds herself. And so I suppose I can do a bit of that if I need to. And I'm also an optimist, which is something I'm very grateful for. So I, as well as feeling sensitive, I also tend to believe that people are good and things will work out.
Okay.
So I don't fall into a spiral of doom and anxiety, which is, thank God, because that's a really difficult thing to live with and to live alongside. So how it shows up when Elizabeth goes bad is that my overstimulation is when I've been around too many people and I've had to converse too much and to give of energy, but also to receive energy in whatever people are telling me. And it's a complicated one because some moments that I feel like that, it's because I've done stuff that I really love doing and that I really believe in. So I will go on tour with How to Fail or with a book that I've written. And it's a beautiful experience every single time because of the audience that shows up and does me the honor of showing up and booking a babysitter or taking time off work and traveling and paying for that ticket and being there and then sharing their experiences in the audience Q&A or in the signing queue afterwards. It's so precious to me. And I'm also aware that after that, I will need quiet time for a few days. Like I need to book that into my diary. And Justin understands that about me as well now. Because otherwise, the way it shows up in me is I get really weepy, overwhelmed, and I feel really, really down. So I don't get angry or anything like that. It's I sort of internalize it, and I can sometimes not remember why I'm feeling so overwhelmed, and then I will remember, or someone will tell me.
So how does it work between you and Justin in terms of your personalities and your sensitivities? Like, tell me about that dovetail.
It's actually great. So we both independently did Myers-Briggs tests, and I am an INFJ, and his letters are the opposite of every single one of those letters. So I'm an introvert, he's an extrovert. Like he gets his energy from being around people, managing people. He's a CEO, he's terrific at it. And I don't. I get my energy from being on my own and in peace and quiet. But actually, we're very complementary because we bring those sides out of each other. So sometimes Justin will also need peace and quiet. And because he has me around, lolling, lolling in bed for hours on a Saturday morning, I think I've helped him lean into that more. And ditto, he's helped me venture out more. And so actually we dovetail very well.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
What a stroke of luck.
what a stroke of luck. Yeah, do you think it's luck, or were you open and receptive to that at that time?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I definitely think that we met at the right time because we were ready for each other and we'd done a lot of work on ourselves individually and we'd gone through a bit. And so we are, I think I can speak for him on this, incredibly grateful every single day that we have the relationship that we do. And it means that we never take it for granted. And I think
Mm.
that's one of the perils of long-term relationships, is that you can just sort of fall into grooves where you stop remembering for whatever reason that it's special,
Mm.
or maybe it's not special and that's why you stop remembering it. But there's that element, like we had to have gone through what we'd gone through to be where we were when we met.
Mm.
And I was definitely much more open-minded and receptive to meeting a different kind of person. And Justin was a different kind of person from anyone I'd been with before, because he was so consistent and clear in showing up, to the extent that I found it a bit weird to begin with. I just wasn't used to it. I was like, why is he doing this? Why is he phoning me? Weird. Like, I want text saying, let's run away to Rio. And then I expect not to hear from you for 6 months.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there was something that I was like, no, there was something instinctively where I was like, this is really good for me. And the chemistry was great. And we had great conversations. And he asks questions and listens. And
Mm.
that's such a rare and noble quality. So, but I had to be ready for that.
That's really lovely. When I interviewed Skye McAlpine not long
Oh.
ago, she said that the experience of meeting her, the man that became her husband at university, she described it as a feeling of being at home, which I found really touching. But do you identify with that?
I find that incredibly moving, because actually that's something I said to myself for years. I want to find someone who feels like I'm finally home, and where I imagined a sense of peace sleeping next to them at night. And yes, that's absolutely what I found with Justin, because I've understood, and it wasn't immediate at all. I didn't get that sense immediately. Um, but I've understood that he accepts me fully as I am. He knows me so incredibly well, and deeper at points than I knew myself. He would say things to me that were sort of quiet revelations in how I understood myself. And so to have someone like that who accepts you, flaws and all, and actually sometimes specifically for the flaws. And I remember in the early days of our relationship, I was crying about something comparatively insignificant. And I apologized to him. I was like, I'm sorry, it's ridiculous. I don't want you to feel like I'm just emoting all the time. And he said, no, I really value the fact that you are in touch with your emotions. I need that and I value it and I respect it. And that was amazing. So it's things like that, home ultimately is a place of acceptance where you feel welcome to walk across the threshold exactly as you are. And you can drop the performance and the pretense and the living on your wits and be at peace. And I think that's why home and what you do is so profoundly important, because it's not about a physical space. It's also about the countries that we are and whether we welcome people who need our shelter or not. Um, it's about psychological safety when you tell the truth about yourself and you know who you are. It's about all of those things.
Hmm. When we were looking around the house earlier, you described your, I always call it like a meet cute, like that they have in the movies.
Yeah.
The moment when you meet another person, but there's also the moment when you meet your home. And you described
Yes.
walking in through this door and go on. What was the feeling that you got when you walked in? What was that?
It was a surge of peace. I was about to say familiarity, but it wasn't quite that. It was that peace and welcome and calm that I was in a beautiful place. And I don't just mean aesthetic beauty. I mean the beauty of the safety of it. And I did well up. I mean, such a cliche, but I just walked in and I new. And people do say that about houses, don't they? And it felt so right. I didn't even question it. I mean, it was beyond our budget and everything. So I was like, no, we have to do it. And I was thinking earlier, because you were talking to me about asking people about their 3 favorite buildings. And I was wondering what I would say in response. And obviously I would choose our home, this building. But the other building that had that impact on me, where I walked in and I cried because of the beauty, was the Pantheon in Rome. It's so stunning. And obviously my home is nothing like the Pantheon. But I think it's also about the care that has been taken to build a space that takes your breath away in some way is kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
The respect that people have paid to the materials and the thought that's gone into every generation.
Yeah.
That's very meaningful too.
Yeah. The Pantheon is an absolutely mind-blowing building.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I'm with you.
Oh.
The way it casts the light from the oculus onto the ground.
Yeah.
It's very profound. But I mean, this is hard to say given your story, but I also think there's something about the womb in it.
Yes.
Yeah,
the circularity.
Human beings, when left to their own devices, remote African tribes and so on, they will build homes that look kind of like wombs. They don't have a conventional door like we do. They have more of a sort of slit. They're always shaped like the Pantheon.
Wow.
And I just think we have this, our inherent nesting instinct, I think, is to try and replicate that feeling of being in the womb,
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So, I agree. Absolutely phenomenal building.
Well, why aren't we all living in circular, smooth, round buildings?
Well, there you go. That's a big question.
It's for another podcast.
You can't get so many in down the street, is the answer.
No, that's what it is. It's packaging, isn't it? It's yeah.
Huh. If I ask you to define that word home, how do you define it?
A place of welcome, acceptance, safety, and peace.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so wonderful.
Oh, brilliant.
And has really made me think and feel. And to do it in the home that I'm talking about has been really, really special. So thank you.
I really appreciate that.
And thank you for providing my most aspirational Instagram content through the modern house and Inigo. Love it. Look at it every single day. Some lovely cottages on Inigo right now.
Is that right? Oh, that's good to hear. Nice advertising. Nicely done.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.